The biting wind howled across the vast, frozen expanse of Alaska, a relentless force that had carved out the life of Silas, a man forged by solitude and sorrow. His cabin, a stoic sentinel against the endless winter, stood on a small hill overlooking a valley of skeletal trees. It was here, 2 years prior, that he had lost his wife, Ilara, to a whiteout blizzard that had descended with the fury of a vengeful god. The memory was a cold knot in his stomach, a scar that had never healed. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper her name, and every snowfall brought back the blinding, disorienting chaos of that day. Silas, with his weathered hands and stooped shoulders, moved through his daily chores with the silent efficiency of a man who had long ago ceased to feel joy. He chopped wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe a lonely metronome in the silence. He tended to his small flock of goats, their bleats a faint echo in the vast emptiness. His life was a monotonous cycle of survival, his only companions the ghosts of his past and the unforgiving land. The nearest settlement was a 3-day journey by dog sled, a distance that felt like a lifetime. The year was 1898, and the promise of gold had drawn a new wave of dreamers to the treacherous north. But Silas had come here for a different kind of wealth, the peace and quiet that only the untamed wild could offer. It had given him that, and it had taken his most precious treasure in return. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a bruised palette of purple and orange, Silas noticed a flicker of movement in the distance. A small, dark shape stumbling through the knee-deep snow. He grabbed his rifle, a habit born of necessity, and watched as the figure drew closer. It was a girl, bundled in a torn, fur-lined parka, her movements slow and desperate. She was young, no more than 20, her face pale and etched with exhaustion. Her eyes, a startling blue against the frost-nipped skin, were wide, with a mixture of fear and determination. She collapsed just a few feet from his cabin door, a small bundle of belongings slipping from her numb fingers. Silas, his heart pounding a rhythm he hadn't felt in years, lowered his rifle and rushed to her side. He lifted her, her body light and dangerously cold, and carried her inside. The warmth of the fire crackled, chasing away the chill from her frozen clothes. He laid her on a bearskin rug and carefully removed her snow-caked outer layers. Her name, she whispered between chattering teeth, was Anya. Anya had been traveling with her family from Seattle, drawn north by the gold rush. Their small homestead, nestled near the Yukon River, had been destroyed by a sudden, violent avalanche. Her parents and younger brother were gone, buried under a mountain of snow and rubble. She was the only survivor, a lone spectre wandering the frozen wasteland. As she spoke, tears froze on her cheeks. "We had nothing left," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "The blizzard. It took everything." Silas felt a profound, aching connection to her words. He had lost his wife to the blizzard, and she had lost her home. It was a shared tragedy, a cruel irony of the Alaskan wilderness. He gave her a bowl of warm stew and watched as she devoured it, her eyes never leaving the flickering fire. For the next few days, Anya was a silent ghost in his home. She moved with a quiet grace, helping with chores, her presence a small, fragile warmth in the cold solitude of his life. She mended his clothes, her nimble fingers working with a practiced ease. She spoke of her family, of the small dreams they had for their new life in Alaska, of the simple joys of a home that was now just a memory. Silas found himself talking too, a flood of words he hadn't realized he had stored inside him. He spoke of Ilara, of their shared dreams of a life in the quiet solitude of the north, of the small things he missed, the sound of her laughter, the way she would hum while she worked. He didn't know why he was telling her this, but it felt right. He saw in her eyes a reflection of his own pain, a deep understanding that transcended words. One evening, as a fresh blanket of snow began to fall, Silas sat by the fire, a worn book in his hands. Anya was sewing a patch onto his coat, her head bowed. The silence between them was no longer an empty void, but a comfortable, companionable stillness. "Anya," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you cannot stay here forever. It's not safe. The nearest settlement—" She looked up, her blue eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "I have nowhere to go, Silas. There's nothing left for me." He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a ghost of his past or a fragile survivor, but as a young woman with a strength that belied her delicate frame. A flicker of an idea, a desperate, irrational impulse, took root in his mind. It was a seed of a dream he had long thought buried. He put the book down, his heart thumping against his ribs. "What if there was something?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. What if you didn't have to leave?" She looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Anya," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them, "I lost my wife to the blizzard, and you lost your home. I have a home, but it's empty. We could build a life here, not a life of loss, but a life of something new." He knelt before her, the warmth of the fire casting long shadows on his face. "Anya," he said again, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me?" She stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. The needle slipped from her fingers, clattering softly on the wooden floor. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of his audacious proposal. Don't miss the rest of this compelling story. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on what happens next. Anya's shock slowly gave way to a wave of complex emotions. The proposal was sudden, born of a shared tragedy and an unexpected connection, but it was also a lifeline. She had spent the last few weeks in a daze of grief and survival, and Silas's cabin was the first place she had felt safe since the avalanche. The warmth of the fire, the quiet strength of the man who had rescued her, and the gentle rhythm of their days had offered a fragile sense of peace. She looked at him, at his weathered face, and the genuine sorrow and hope in his eyes. He wasn't proposing out of passion, but out of a shared need. A need for companionship, for a future, for a way to face the crushing loneliness of the Alaskan wild. She didn't love him, not yet, but she trusted him. His proposal wasn't a demand, but an offering. "Silas," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Say yes, and we'll figure out the rest. We'll build a life here, together." Anya took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. The image of her buried family, of their lost dreams, flashed in her mind. She could run, try to make it to the nearest settlement and start over alone, but the thought of facing that world, a world of strangers and cold indifference, filled her with a profound weariness. Here, with Silas, there was a chance for something real, something that could grow from the ashes of their shared loss. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Silas, I will marry you." A small, hesitant smile touched his lips, a look of relief and wonder. He reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. The contact was a simple affirmation, a promise of a new beginning. News of their impending marriage spread slowly through the scattered settlements of the area. A trapper passing by on his route carried the news, and a few weeks later, a traveling preacher arrived, having braved the treacherous winter trails. They were married in the small, cozy warmth of Silas's cabin, with only a few curious trappers and the preacher as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, the vows a quiet promise of a future forged in the harsh reality of their world. The first few months of their marriage were a careful dance of two strangers learning to live as one. Anya, with her gentle spirit and quiet strength, brought a new kind of light to the cabin. She filled the empty spaces with her presence, her laughter, and her small touches of home, a vase of dried wildflowers, a freshly baked loaf of bread, the scent of cinnamon and cloves. Silas, in turn, began to shed the heavy cloak of his grief. He found himself looking forward to coming home, to the sight of Anya by the fire, to the sound of her humming a tune as she worked. He taught her to track game, to set snares, and to read the signs of the changing weather. She, in turn, taught him to slow down, to appreciate the quiet moments, and to find beauty in the small things. One frigid afternoon, a fierce storm descended upon the valley. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and shaking the foundations of the cabin. Anya, a seasoned daughter of the north, prepared for the long hours of the blizzard. She checked the food stores, ensured the fire was well stocked, and prepared blankets. Silas watched her, a quiet admiration in his eyes. She was no longer a fragile survivor. She was his partner, his equal. As the storm raged outside, they sat together by the fire, a comfortable silence between them. Silas found himself telling her more about Ilara, not with the aching sorrow he once carried, but with a gentle fondness. He spoke of the life they had planned, of the small hopes they had for their future. Anya listened, her hand resting on his arm, her presence a silent balm to his old wounds. "She would have liked you," Silas said, his voice low. "She would have seen your strength." Anya smiled, her eyes on the dancing flames. "And your wife must have been a very special woman, Silas, for you to have loved her so deeply." He nodded, a peaceful expression on his face. The ghosts of the past were no longer tormentors, but quiet companions. They were a part of his story, but not the whole of it. The future was now. Their life together was not a fairy tale. It was built on practicality, on shared work, and on the slow, steady growth of a deep and abiding respect. Love wasn't a sudden passion. It was a quiet warmth that grew in the space between them. It was in the way Silas would bring her a handful of wild berries in the summer, or the way Anya would make his favorite stew on a cold winter night. It was in the silent understanding that passed between them, the knowledge that they were facing this harsh world together. The third year of their marriage brought a new challenge. A small mining company, a new player in the gold rush, began to expand its operations into their valley. Their cabin, once a symbol of solitude, now stood in the path of progress. The company offered to buy their land, a generous sum of money that could buy them a new life in the city, far from the harsh realities of the Alaskan wilderness. Silas, a man of the land, was enraged. This valley was his home, a sanctuary of memory and solitude. He refused their offer, his voice a hard knot of defiance, but Anya, ever the pragmatist, saw the bigger picture. "Silas," she said one evening, as the sounds of dynamite echoed from the distance, "they will not stop. They will take it from us one way or another." "This is our home," he roared, his fists clenched. "This is our life. I will not let them take it. And if you fight them, you will be fighting alone," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We are two people against a company. We have a chance to build a new life, a safer one. We can leave this place behind, Silas. We can find a new home, one that isn't haunted by the past." He looked at her, his anger slowly giving way to a profound sadness. He had built this home with Ilara, and now it was a symbol of both his love and his loss. To leave it was to leave a part of himself behind. But as he looked at Anya, at the woman who had brought light back into his life, he realized that his home was no longer just the cabin. It was wherever she was. The next day, Silas met with the company representatives. He signed the papers, his hand trembling slightly. He felt a profound sense of loss, a finality to the chapter of his life with Ilara. But as he walked back to the cabin, he saw Anya waiting for him at the door, a worried expression on her face. When he reached her, she didn't ask what he had done. She simply took his hand and led him inside. She had packed their belongings, a small collection of their life together. She had made him his favorite stew, the scent filling the cabin with warmth and comfort. "It's okay, Silas," she said, her eyes filled with understanding. "We'll build a new home, a new life, together." They left the next morning, leaving behind the cabin that had been both a prison of grief and a sanctuary of love. The snow was falling, soft and gentle, a stark contrast to the blizzard that had taken so much from them. As they sledded away, Silas took one last look at the cabin, his heart filled with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. He had lost his wife to the blizzard, and Anya had lost her home, but in their shared tragedy they had found a new life, a new home, and a love that had grown from the ashes of their past. And as they disappeared into the vast, white expanse of the Alaskan wild, they knew that no matter where they went, they would never be alone again.